Welcome to Season 2, Episode 4, Chronicles of UK Salafism, an Insider Perspective. This particular episode will concentrate on the year 2003 and the events that transpired over the course of this year. As I have done with previous episodes, I want to connect the previous year and this one with some of the events that spilled over and will continue to affect and pose challenges to the Salafi community on a local level, Brixton in particular, and on a more national scale. And I want to refer to an official statement that was published by Brixton Mosque at the beginning of 2002 to reinforce what I highlighted in the previous episode, whereby we countered some of the allegations that were being made against the mosque and myself. And I'll mention a particular entity that was quite vocal online with their accusations against the mosque in this statement. So one of the excerpts read, "All praises due to Allah, the media have begun to give airtime to the Salafis of Brixton at a time when only certain partisan groups and individuals were raising their heads and speaking, but only representing one of either extremes, either the liberal rationalist opinions or the extremist takfiri views were aired to the world with nothing in between this. But after the Salafis have been referred to by much of the media, maybe now many people can begin to decipher the real Islam, that of Salafiyah, from the heretical brands that were gaining excessive coverage in the Western press. Brixton Masjid has received some coverage, with Abdul Haq Baker making matters clear as to what Islam is and what it is not." The statement continued addressing some particular aspects, but then went on to address a particular area, should I say, that caused consternation and came to our attention. Continuing with another excerpt. "Yet, what has now emerged is that the Hizb, known as Azam, have made takfir on the Salafis of Brixton. The newspaper article links they are deriving their evidence from is found just below this passage, and the stories are with regards to Brother Abdul Haq Baker and his coverage in the newspapers. Thus, Azam publications are implying that Abdul Haq Baker is in a state of kufr, disbelief, rida, apostasy, and nifaq, hypocrisy. We must be aware that this is hasty and foolish judgment and has further displayed the utter ignorance of the Azam party, the Hizb, as it's called in Arabic, especially after the Jummah Khutbah, the sermon on the 28th of December 2001, wherein Abdul Haq Baker clarified the situation in depth, confirming what many of us had already held to have been the case, namely that of how the media largely twisted and contorted much of Abdul Haq's speech, taking words out of context and in cases blatantly concocting matters, such as the main fabrication of how Abdul Haq had given names of individuals that he was concerned about to the authorities who were going to fight jihad. This is what the Times and the Mirror reported, not to mention some of the television news broadcasting companies. But what is fraudulent is that Azam took these words from the Times and other disbelieving news agencies and used this media report as evidence to pronounce the rulings of kufr, nifaq and rida on Abdul Haq Baker and the Salafis. And then the verse in Surah Hujurat, 49th chapter of the Quran, verse 6, which I referred to in the previous episode, was cited. And the statement continued. So one should take this verse into consideration before taking the news bulletins of non-Islamic tabloids and conservative sheets. And then it goes into detail about my sermon, in which it refers to Azam publications and their possible concerns, in which it states, "So it seems that Azam were disturbed or Azam, sorry, were disturbed and just watching their own backs, lest their Takfiri associates should be cited. Yet, as Abdul Haq Baker mentioned in the Friday sermon, openly on the 28th of December 2001, quote, the transcript, the Salafis of Brixton are not of those who grass. The only names mentioned were those already known in the media, 5 people. We were asked about them and we responded. We did not go to them, the media. They came to us. Close transcript quote. Thus, the likes of Abu Qatada, Abdullah Faisal and Abu Hamza were all refuted in the media for their stances, which are well known to the general public. Omar Bakri and many others like him should be opposed due to their hijacking of the media spotlight and claims to Islamic knowledge. Nevertheless, they have gathered huge followings of ignorant youth to their emotional rantings. End of quote. And the hadith, which is well known, an authentic narration in the collections of Ahmed and others, in which the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, stated, indeed there are years to come in which a person will become very confused. A time when a liar is believed and the truthful person is proclaimed a liar. And the deceitful person is entrusted and an honest person is accused of being untrustworthy. A time when the Ruwaybida will speak. It was asked, and who are the Ruwaybida? So the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, replied, the insignificant person who speaks on public affairs. So this was a statement that was issued by our media officer at the time, Abdul Haq Ashante, and circulated, addressing Azam Publications, which was presided over and run by individuals like Baba Ahmed, who is well known, his brother, and other affiliates who belonged to or were associated with the entity itself, Muazzam Beg. Also, we faced what I would say was an apparent racism in the manner in which we were dealt with from certain segments of the wider Muslim community. The Muslim Council of Britain, MCB, they left a voice message on our phone in which Inyat Bangawala, who belonged to this organisation at the time, was very adamant that we as converts should not represent our own community and speak, and that instead we should call them to represent us and the Muslims of the South London area, Brixton in particular. Unsurprisingly, my colleagues and I, when we heard that, derided such a statement, and we did not contact MCB. Also, in support of my assertion that we were detecting racism from the wider Muslim populace, or some areas of the wider Muslim, predominantly South Asian populace, was following an interview I'd done with my then brother-in-law from the Bangladeshi community in Tower Hamlets. He was a journalist for the Asian Eye, I believe it was, and he came to interview me about the events that had transpired. Now, in my statement and my interview, I mentioned that in view of the fact that the Muslim population largely comprised of South Asian Muslims, that the very small percentage of those who were susceptible to extremism or sympathetic to it, of that small population, an even smaller cohort but significant one would be South Asians. They would be more than converts, Arabs, Africans, by virtue of the fact that the wider population of Muslims was largely South Asian. And that was met with anger as well. But not sticking solely with this particular aspect, which became one of the fronts that we had to counter and respond throughout that particular year and 2003, we also had to address another area and mount challenges And that was within the Salafi communities themselves. Due to the Salafi publication cult, Abu Khadijat cult as I now call them, becoming even more active in their hegemonic intent to become the voice of Salafi dawah, the Salafi propagation in the United Kingdom. And they'd borrowed the template from Jimas, because this is how Jimas dominated during the 90s. So in countering that, I decided to write on the 2nd of February 2002 to the Jordanian sheikhs and express some of my concerns. And I wrote a 17-point letter to them. And I don't want to go into too much detail with this letter, but I mentioned in point 16, I personally do not recognize anyone worthy of being termed a leader of Salafiyya in this country, neither do I consider myself to be one. There is a saying, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. I see this regarding some of those who have studied a little. When some of them return, they become intoxicated with the praise and respect they have. We are criticized for not knowing enough Arabic. This is a fair criticism. However, when I see those who have learnt it, I seek refuge in Allah that I become as they have and say, Alhamdulillah, at least I know my position. Many of the brothers in Brixton have been contacted by, who have been contacted by others saying that people have envy for the position for Brixton. However, I have up until recently chosen to ignore this because there is nothing to be envious of. I concluded by asking the sheikhs to speak to Shaykh Rabee and other senior scholars at the time. And I said that, quote, I only want from this that the shuyukh, the scholars, cause us and our brothers to be humble and know our limits. So I've gone back into the previous year because on relocating to Saudi Arabia, these particular issues were very prominent and still required addressing. So much so that in April of 2003, after I'd lived in Saudi Arabia for close to a year, the management of the mosque decided we should write a letter now to Shaykh Rabee ibn Hadi al-Madkhali because of that continuing tide of counter narratives against any Salafi entity that was not affiliated with the Salafi publications cult. So in short, we wrote a letter on that day stating to the Sheikh our position, lauding the Sheikh and showing deference to him because we felt obliged to do that on that occasion. And I'll again only refer to certain excerpts of this letter. And we started, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. We, the Idara of Masjid Ibn Taymiyyah, the administration of Brixton Mosque, are very pleased to continue our learning and dialogue with you that we started many years ago when we came to visit you in Medina. We hold you as our esteemed scholar and one of those who we turn to for guidance in our hours of ease and hours of need. Indeed, we were very happy that some brothers from the administration, namely Abdul Haq and Abu Haja Abdul Rahman, came to see you and the scholars from Medina recently in Hajj. So that was the introduction. We mentioned to the Sheikh what we were teaching in the West and the books that we were teaching. We referred to the scholars, the contemporaries of Shaykh Rabee, who we also were in contact with and seeking religious instruction from. And we concluded the letter confirming our love for the Sheikh. Now, this was an exercise, again, that we felt obliged to send to the Sheikh, and there are a few signatures on there, mine included, Jafar Jeffrey, Jamal Boichi, Abdurrahman Anderson. There's one other that I cannot decipher at this particular moment in time. And so it again placed us and others in a position where we were continually having to justify ourselves, which was detracting from a more geopolitical, I think, global issue that we needed to deal with in solidarity with other Muslim groups, organizations, communities, following 9/11, following the more local events of individuals becoming radicalized in our communities. The Richard Reed, the shoe bomber, Zacharias Moussaoui, and as we've seen as the years have continued, the next generation of individuals becoming radicalized. So these things were distractions, but necessary distractions at the time. I include in this countering, from our perspective, historical Dawa perspective that I put together on the 12th of March, because again, there was a need to write a chronology of events. And I've mentioned that in the first point. It has become necessary to provide a chronological account of the masjid's contribution to the dawah, especially in light of the many accusations that have been directed at us by those who are either envious of what has been established by this centre or who are simply unaware of what has transpired. I won't go into the rest of the details here, but suffice it to say that we mentioned in point 13 our focus on dealing with issues and problems that face Muslims within Western society, and that we do not operate from a remote place or city where we can spend time writing numerous articles or paying too much attention to websites, in contrast to Salafi publications, whose website presence in the early noughties was very, very prominent, and they had time for that, being a main city, but not the capital. We were involved in grassroots interventions, engagement, initiatives, where we were having to go out into the community, and we were much more hands-on. And the community, to an extent, continues to be that way. So I've highlighted this correspondence, these points, these articles that we felt the need to write to validate, if you like, our work and our position. And this continued, as I mentioned, with me being in Saudi Arabia. We invited Sheikh Ali Hassan, when he came to Saudi to perform Umrah, to my home on the 8th of August. And once again, this issue around the internal disputes and fighting was what preoccupied the Salafis of the UK, and the two most prominent areas, if you'd like, Birmingham and Brixton, London. Luton was a third area. And it was clear that one group, one entity, was causing this dissension amongst the others, these divisions amongst the others. And we were busy with that. When Sheikh Ali Hassan came to sit and visit us at our home, we spoke to him about some of the issues at hand. Again, I'd written to him 11 points seeking advice from him, and he duly gave that advice. We mentioned that we were busy and occupied with engaging and participating in wider society because it was necessary in view of the spotlight being placed upon us. And evidence of that can be seen in a letter that I received at the mosque. Despite me being abroad, it was sent to the mosque on the 21st of June 2003. And it was one of a few significant correspondence from local authorities, the police, local government, Home Office, clearly viewing and observing the activities that we were doing independently. And this letter read as follows on the 21st of June 2003 from the head of the Muslim Contact Unit, Metropolitan Police. Let me take this opportunity to place on record the value that I attach to the community initiatives that the Brixton Mosque is currently involved in. In many respects, the work being undertaken on behalf of the local community is of a pioneering nature and stands as a role model for other mosques and community centres in London, where similar problems have to be overcome. Of particular value are the educational seminars that you have been running. Here, there is no doubt that many young people in the community are learning valuable lessons about good citizenship and the value of working within the local communities. The forthcoming programme of summer seminars looks especially beneficial, and on behalf of the Metropolitan Police Service, I extend our good wishes for the success of this latest project. I have discussed it with representatives from the Home Office, and I know there is great support there too. So this was an outward entity looking in at what we were doing, without invitation, without knowledge as such. But we were aware that the spotlight was very much on us because of the very recent attention in 2001, 2002. This is evidence to the liberal think tanks and entities that mounted a campaign in the noughties to marginalise the Salafi communities across the country by conflating them with violent extremism, and if they could not succeed in that, non-violent extremism. So much so that they influenced David Cameron and his then government to proclaim such categorizations of Salafis. In the early noughties, evidence was witnessed as to the efficacy of the Salafi community's success and effectiveness in combating violent extremism. And it's unfortunate that we were not more united as an entity to deliver a more emphatic message societally and to thwart or halt the negative connotations and conflations with our social conservatism. And drawing to a conclusion now, I want to look at the most significant event in 2003, which was the international event of the war in Iraq, the invasion of Iraq. And on the 16th of March, the world witnessed the largest coordinated vigil as part of the global protests against the imminent war in Iraq. And on the 19th of March, the world then witnessed a US and British-led coalition commence airstrikes on the country, signalling the beginning of the invasion. And this was in defiance of world opinion and the United Nations. On the 20th of March, the ground invasion began. And many of us would remember that, and I in particular remember it because my youngest daughter was born in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah. And as we held our newborn, we were watching the TV screen in the room, hospital room, of the US and UK Humvees surging across the Iraqi desert land as the invasion accelerated. Finally, I would refer to a significant meeting that would have ramifications later on in the noughties and beyond. And that was none other than a meeting on the 23rd of October 2003 in Medina with Shaykh Mohammed bin Hadi al-Madkhali. And a number of brothers and colleagues attended this meeting, some of whom came from Brixton. And I have the minutes in front of me from two colleagues, so I cross-referenced their notes, which gave more veracity to some of the points that have been highlighted. And in this meeting, Shaykh Mohammed bin Hadi expressed his unhappiness with the Brixton community because of our inviting the Jordanian sheikhs the previous year and Sheikh Osama Kursi, and for some of the statements that were uttered during that particular conference. Shaykh Mohammed bin Hadi also highlighted that he and some of the sheikhs had more knowledge than other senior scholars like Sheikh Abdul Muhsin Abad in the affair of the dispute with Abul Hassan al-Ma'rabi and these particular issues. He also mentioned how Shaykh Rabee would know a person for 20, 30 years and see there were issues with them well before they were coming. And this was a statement that still did not really settle with a number of individuals, but they dare not speak it publicly. Because if that was the case, we now see that Shaykh Mohammed bin Hadi is now at loggerheads with Shaykh Rabee bin Hadi al-Madkhali. And that with the Salafi publications cult, there are fewer than a handful of scholars that they refer to now. Mohammed bin Hadi is no longer with them. But the reason this had ramifications later on, because there was a point in this meeting where he, quote, spoke about Abdul Haq and Birmingham, and that Sheikh Mohammed had advised them both separately on more than one occasion that they should make Islah, peace, and conciliation, and that I, Abdul Haq, should go to the brothers in Birmingham to talk to them, and that they should treat me well when I come, but I never went. And that Shaykh Mohammed expressed he was displeased with this, since not only he had advised me, but Shaykh Rabee had said exactly the same thing. I don't recall Shaykh Rabee ever advising me personally about that with the many sittings that I had with him. With Shaykh Mohammed bin Hadi, we sat and met on 2 occasions in his home. He hosted me well, but on one of the occasions when he adjured me to go and visit them, it was he and I with my very little Arabic and him with his very little English, could not get our points across very well. And when my colleague who'd taken me there finished doing tuition with his son, then we came out and spoke, and he insisted I go and visit Birmingham. I said I would do that at his request. On returning to the UK for a few days and calling Birmingham, reluctantly albeit, to try and effect the instructions or the recommendation from Shaykh Mohammed bin Hadi, I got a general lukewarm response that Abu Khadija and colleagues would be out of Birmingham on each of the days I suggested that I would come up. And I would not be able to stay beyond the next week, so I returned to Jeddah, failing in the task of visiting them, not through want of trying on my part. Now that is a trait and I think a behavioural aspect of this entity that many are aware of when they don't want to be seen, whether it's by a scholar or a colleague like myself, then they are conspicuous by their absence, but that's another matter in itself. It then transpired later on that Shaykh Mohammed bin Hadi made statements, disparaging statements, where he accused Brixton, myself, of being untruthful, which then resulted in me approaching him privately with a letter in Arabic asking for evidence of this, failing which, as we're in Saudi Arabia and there are Sharia courts, that I would institute legal proceedings, which I did, but did not complete them against him. We will conclude. My religious instruction in 2003 was focused around Arabic, which was very stop-start, haphazard, partly my fault, partly because there were not at that time consistent programs that could be attended that I was aware of. So I attended a course in King Abdulaziz University, and between the 12th of January to the 20th of May, I attended the program and passed the 2nd level. I also recall attending Shaykh Rabee's home on a few occasions to sit and partake in his Manhaj al-Anbiya, Stories of the Prophets book, based on his own book. I had the English translation, so as the Arabic was read out, I followed the corresponding pages in English. And I will end this particular episode at that juncture.